Beleza, galera? Vamos retomar aqui. Bom, sem mais delongas, eu queria chamar ao palco o vice-presidente e principal analyst do Forrester, Randy Heffner. Please, Randy, come over. Salva de palmas aí, galera.
Thank you, Clever. It's fun to be back in Brazil again. It's been 10 or 12 years since I got to be here. But what I wanted to do in the time that I have is connect the ideas of how you transform and change your business with how you manage and run your API program and your API strategy. And I want to spend more time on that latter part of how you do APIs and make sure that you focus on the most important things that you need to get right for APIs. But in order for you to understand that, you have to make the connection to business and digital transformation. In the panel session and the keynotes this morning, I enjoyed them very much. The most important phrase that you should take away from those sessions this morning to understand digital transformation and why APIs are important for digital transformation, the most important thing that any of the speakers said this morning was, I don't know. The reason that that was the most important thing is because APIs enable you to react much better to something happening that you didn't know was going to happen. That's why I don't know is sort of the starting point for APIs. But that's not the story that you'll often hear. I went out ahead of time in preparing this presentation, so just in the last 2 weeks or so, went out to the internet and put into the search engine, best practices for APIs, why to do APIs. And within some of the top answers that I got on the web were things like, an API is great. It allows you to outsource your requirements for data to another app, or the application and the service are decoupled. Isso é bom. And then another one says, APIs enable access decoupled from the client, across different technical environments. Isso maravilhoso. Or an API-led approach lets reusable APIs, expedite integration and data warehouse and legacy, eu mesmo. It's the same technical stuff. It doesn't get you to the connection between why are we doing APIs and what are we trying to accomplish as a business. It doesn't answer this kind of a question. I'll get to that question in a minute. But if that's your view of APIs, then great. Every team is building APIs, and maybe you've got an API catalog, and all the projects are dropping APIs into a catalog, and you hope that future projects will search and discover and use those APIs. I've been talking about SOA and APIs for maybe 17, 18 years or something like that. And guess what? People don't go search and discover and find the APIs, particularly inside your company. That's always a problem people are coming to me with. But this is what you get if you're thinking that APIs are just for integration and APIs are just for technical decoupling. But what this particularly doesn't explain is this. So here we went and we asked in one of our surveys, where do you stand right now using APIs externally? And by the way, this data that I'm going to show you would be about the same if we said internally. And so 31% said we're not interested, we don't have plans for APIs. These are developers. 43% said we currently use APIs. And then there were some that were in between. But I want to focus on these two on the outside, because we also asked them, so tell us about revenue growth at your company. For those that were not interested and not using APIs, when we looked at the higher revenue growth, only 11% had revenue growth of 15% or more. The others that were currently using external APIs had revenue growth, 29% of them had revenue growth of 15% or more. And if you go down to where you're looking at negative revenue growth, it's the opposite. 10% of using APIs have negative growth, 30% have, of those not using APIs have negative revenue growth. So this is correlation, not causation, but it's still a very important and very interesting data point to notice, and that it's so consistent from the top of revenue growth down to revenue going away. And it may be that the companies that are growing fast realize we have to do something different, or it may be that they do something different and that helps them grow faster. But there's this connection. Why is there this connection? Because APIs help you change your business faster, and changing business is sort of the new normal. In our surveys, we often don't get a chance to define the terms that we're using because it just takes too long in the process. But when we ask them about digital transformation, we give them these sentences that basically say, digital transformation means you're changing your company in a big way. When we tell them this and ask, well, so where are you in digital transformation? 43% say that we are currently undergoing a digital transformation, or we have just finished one. And that's a lot of change. That's a lot of companies changing. But the companies that really get it are the 36% who say we are always in a state of digital transformation. We are always changing. Digital transformation is entering into a state of an unpredictable world, unpredictable environment, and you don't know where things are going next. So there, I said it. I came back to it. I don't know is the starting point for digital transformation. And if you're going to change like that, you have to think differently about your company. If you think about your company in a traditional business kind of way, you think about the whole company all as one thing. What kind of company are we? Are we a bank? Are we a retailer? Are we a manufacturer? But you think about the whole company, and then you start defining who are our customers. If we're a bank, are we a retail bank or commercial customers? Is that who we serve? What channels and partners? And how do we integrate with partners for efficiency? APIs enable you to have an open business model. The idea is you start with understanding that your company is a collection of competencies, a collection of things that you're good at, or unique assets. That's the important thing. You're not a bank. You are an organization that is good at fraud and account management and international funds transfer and a variety of other things that just add up to being a bank. When you look at it this way, then you start asking, what are we good at? What ecosystems need the things that we're good at? What relationships will get us into those ecosystems? How do we connect to enable those relationships to leverage the ecosystems? So notice, I didn't put customers here. Where did customers go? Well, the thing is, you may reach customers indirectly through a marketplace or through an influencer or someone else. So you still have to think about your business this way to some degree. But over here is where APIs allow flexibility, and you start thinking about business agility and change and external integration at the exact opposite end of the thought process. And when I say ecosystems here, this might be your own supply-side ecosystems, the companies that you pull together to do your business. It might be your customers' ecosystems, and who else are they working with? Or it might be whole new ecosystems. One of my favorite examples is a telco that created billing APIs to help them improve customer service, but then they realized they could sell billing services to other companies. Well, suddenly a telco is entering a whole other business that's not telco. It's billing services. And by the way, when you're constructing new business models like that, you might consume APIs from other companies and pull them together into some new business model. And so it's just as important to think about yourselves as an API consumer organization as it is an API provider organization. But we'll talk mostly about API provider because that's the harder part of the question. But this is how you have to think differently about business, and it's all fundamentally organized around the idea that you don't know what is going to happen, so you have to know what you're good at so that you know where you can go, what things you can do, and you're ready for change. You're ready for rapidly reconfiguring your business for whatever the new scenario is. That means you focus on competencies or capabilities, and that's where APIs come in. If you're a bank, here are some of the competencies that you're good at. An API strategy is to understand these, put them, enable them as APIs, and then you can start doing things to improve the business, whether it's inside streamlining your own processes, or opening new sales channels or partnerships, or doing whole new products. Maybe as a bank, you're good at risk management, and you start selling that as a service on its own. But when I say an API, here I want to give an example. I'm talking, these are business APIs, and I'll define that and compare that in a moment. But what I mean is the API for credit scoring is not an API into your credit scoring application. It's an API that defines how you do business and what your credit score capability is, and it might have multiple applications behind it. Those are of no concern compared to how you are designing the interface of the API. That's where you're defining your business capabilities, and that's an important, critical place to focus. So, as we now turn toward more of how to do your API strategy, then the starting point is having a good API taxonomy. And I've been talking about a part of this with business APIs, but first you have to understand there are four major categories of APIs. Internal APIs might be called private APIs. They're what you use inside your company to build your own mobile apps or business processes or customer service or what have you. Open web APIs are what you hear the market talking the most about and making the most noise about. It's easiest for the press to see and touch and talk about open web APIs, so you hear more about that, where most any developer might sign up to use your APIs. But really, there's twice as much stuff going on with B2B APIs. Every one of your organizations, I would bet, has B2B API opportunities that we could talk about quite readily. Open web APIs, maybe not so much. That takes some more thinking about where and how you want to do the interaction in a very open way. But there's a lot of opportunity there. Product APIs are a fourth category that I'm trying to get the industry talking more about. That's where you are directly configuring or integrating with a product or a service. I'll give you just one example, and then you can ask questions or find me afterwards if you want to drill more into this. But if I'm a hotel firm, through one of these three types of APIs, I might allow you to reserve a hotel room. Through a product API, I might allow you to control the hotel room itself. Parental controls on the TV. One thing that I'll bet Sensedia wishes they had is an API to control the Wi-Fi, to give a private Wi-Fi name. I'm sure they would much rather the Wi-Fi name that you're all connecting to be APIX versus whatever technology something or other it is. But that's a product API, connecting directly to it. Business APIs define the way the business operates, the way a business person would think about how do we do an account transfer as a bank, or as an insurance company, how do we capture a first notice of loss, or an e-commerce order, or whatever it might be. Application APIs are the technical stuff that we started with. Those are important, they're good, you need those, but they're not where your fundamental digital transformation enablement is. And they might be at the user interface level or integration or some kind of application component. And there might be infrastructure APIs, utility functions, APIs that are controlling a cloud platform. The important reason to distinguish between these different types of APIs is they need different designs. You might do different governance around them, put much more governance around business APIs than the others. Infrastructure APIs, you might just need to know how to use them as part of your teams and part of your platform structures. But this is the API taxonomy provides a foundation, and this is just a simplified taxonomy. Then the next thing that you want to talk about is how you organize within a type of API, and I'll talk here mostly about business APIs, but also how you relate APIs to microservices for implementing. APIs and microservices, it's best to think about them as two separate things, even though very often you'll hear people referring to a microservice, and what they're really referring to is an API. Well, of course, a microservice might provide an API, but they're two different things, and I want to help you understand that, as well as understand a concept about how to organize teams around APIs. So here I've drawn a picture of the order management domain. And you want to provide order management capabilities to your own mobile apps and business partners and a variety of other other channels. And you have a number of other domains that have their own business capabilities, credit, inventory, et cetera. Each one of these provides a number of different capabilities that your firm uses to put together your business and your business processes. So let's talk about what happens inside here. We might have within order management a number of fine-grained microservice components. So what I mean here is an individual deployable unit that I can build and deploy separately. That's what microservices is all about, is making these components smaller so that I have more flexibility for deployment. Well, I've shown 3, but I might have 50 different components that factor into order management. So great. What if I take all 50 of those and I make them available to all of those channels? I wind up with a mess, is what I wind up with, because each one of them is going to do order fulfillment in a different way, and we're going to have confused and unhappy customers because they're going to have inconsistent order fulfillment. So what do? That's where we come in with business APIs as entry points into a domain of microservices. And here's where we really want to apply API management capabilities in a major way to help manage the relationships between the users of APIs and us as a provider of APIs. So these are domain services or entry points into the domains, the microservice domains. Then within a domain, each one of the APIs might be backed by another microservice that knows how to call the components inside, which might still be accessed by APIs. But here we're at a different level where maybe some of those APIs are managed by API management. Maybe some of them are more connected and secured by a service mesh. And so we have a mix of capabilities there. So you have to understand how to put together API management and service mesh and microservice management along with API design and microservice design. Microservice design can get a whole lot more complex than this, but what I want you to take away is that there are basically 2 major levels of APIs and 2 different levels of granularity to talk about microservices so that you have the APIs you need externally, but also the flexibility that you need to build and change those APIs very quickly. Okay, so that's the deepest that we're going to go technically. Now we'll start climbing back out. To say that these APIs ought to be managed within coherent portfolios. So I showed earlier on that if your teams are just kind of doing whatever API seems interesting to them and dropping them in a catalog, you're going to be lucky if projects find and use those APIs. Instead, what you can do, and again, I'll talk primarily at the business API level, but the concepts apply for other types of APIs, is organize and understand the business domains, like on the previous chart, but understand first the candidate APIs that you might have within that domain. And that can be done very quickly. What you might do is organize a working group around each domain, development teams, and others that understand and are interested in that domain, and get them together for a quick half day or a day to just understand what are the major business units of work, the queries and transactions that might one day be APIs. Give them a couple sentence description, and we're done. We understand something about our candidate portfolios so that when we go to design the individual APIs, we understand and know some context around them so that we can be evolving a coherent portfolio of APIs. So our catalog starts out as just candidate APIs, then projects come along, and what we want to do is bring the knowledge of the working groups into collaboration between project level folks and enterprise architects and domain architects so that we can understand what's the best API design that's going to meet the immediate project needs, but also fits with a longer-term evolution of our portfolio. You may not get it exactly right, but the idea is to get it better. But then also, when you have one of these projects, you know what domains it's going to be working in. A domain architect that understands that domain can help the projects find the right APIs that they should be using. And so projects come along, and one project builds some APIs, the next project uses some of those and builds some new ones, and you evolve that portfolio over time so that you're building a coherent business, an evolving, continually changing business, but something that's coherent versus just whatever APIs a team happened to create. All of this is what Kleber mentioned as API portfolio management earlier, and it requires some change in how we think about APIs and how we're doing them. It also requires a much greater degree of collaboration, because there are probably some of you, when I said that we're going to get architects in the middle of your development project to collaborate around what APIs you're going to do, some of you probably said, no, not architects. They slow everything down. They mess everything up. Well, they can. They're getting better. I'm an architect, so I can say that, but only if they do it right. But the other thing that's important is to understand that developers with short-sighted views can run the company into the ground, because you can be working real hard, but if every new project you're redoing everything because you didn't quite think through it last time, you're not, in the end, you may feel like you're being agile, but you're not really being agile over the long haul because you're doing too much rework from one project to the next. So you have to combine both of them. And there's a whole bunch of practices I can talk about how to do that, but I just want to, for the moment, get developers and architects focused on collaboration. And here's the way that I like to describe it is the difference between good billiards or great billiards and world-class billiards. So great billiards is making this crazy 4-bank shot, and you get 2 balls in a corner and a side pocket. That's what developers do. Developers are heroes. They jump in the middle, they stay up late, they get things done, people slide pizzas under the door to developers, and it's great. They get things done. We need heroes like that. But the most they can do is great billiards. World-class billiards is doing that and leaving the cue ball in place for the next shot, so that you can do one crazy shot after another. That's what makes world-class billiards, and that's what architects add to the picture. But it only works if we can get the collaboration going between them. So that's a key part of making this all work. When you're designing an API, there are 4 major things that go into identifying and designing a good API. And the most important single thing, though, is to understand that the interface design for an API is something completely different than the implementation design. So what I'm talking about here is designing the API interface. I don't care what's behind that interface, so long as it delivers the promise of the interface. So what goes into interface design? There are 4 major things. What goes in, what goes out, the promise, what we expect it to do, including expected side effects. Something that will happen that maybe not be exactly RESTful principles. Like, for example, if I give you an API that is post/order, for those of you that are deep into REST API, so should that actually cause the order to start processing or not? Or should it just store a new order record? The only way you know the answer to that question is by looking at the documentation. We'll get to that in a second. But the fact that the order starts to process and be fulfilled is a side effect that you have to understand what's going to happen when you actually do it. Well, these first 3 tell you something about where the API fits in an API taxonomy. Order submission, get customer, I don't care where the customer is, it's a business API. Get customer from the legacy customer application, that's an application API. It's a different contract promise. The quality of service aspects, and these are just a few of them, there can be much more, typically are implementation concerns. I'll leave it there for now. There are some cases where quality of service may come back up into the API taxonomy concern. But those 4 things are what it takes to have a good API design, and so your design processes should be built around that. So I mentioned documentation, and the documentation is critical and important. The difficulty, and by the way, you should think of API design and documentation as going very closely together. But the difficulty is, depending upon the tooling that you're using, API documentation can come from a lot of different places. API management solutions do a little bit in that way, and some of them do more, and some of them manage your documentation very well, and some not so well. But if you're designing, APIs via creation tools or custom development tools, you get some API documentation. There are some standalone API documentation tools that might be part of a broader process. Portfolio management and the capabilities of governance there factor into how you get documentation done. And the business role of API product management is part of getting the right kind of documentation done. So all of this, you have to consider how, across your life cycle, what aspects does each one of these tools and process disciplines, how do they factor into creating the right designs and the right documentation? And a little note, again, there's much more that could be said here, but about APIs themselves, there's a bit too much focus on just REST APIs as people are talking about about APIs these days. We've been connecting across companies for a long time, B2B portals or electronic data interchange or managed file transfer. A few cases I've seen that there's some kind of embedded user experience where one can put a portlet inside their web page to connect off to some other capability. And now APIs come along. Well, your business partners, you should be thinking about a wide variety of what are the connections points that you need and which are the right ones for APIs. But even in the realm of APIs, REST is the only thing that people are talking about, except in a few cases. And you saw, again, Kleber this morning mention event-driven APIs. Could be WebSockets, could be Kafka, could be a variety of other mechanisms. So events, streams, webhooks, remote views like the Twitter embedded timeline API, a variety of other mechanisms. The problem you're trying to solve is digital connections across enterprises, and REST APIs just happen to be a very good, currently very popular mechanism for doing that, but your thinking needs to be broader than that because there are other opportunities, other possibilities. So your goal in the end, what you're trying to do is to have a good set of layered APIs that meet different goals, and business APIs, the reason I focus so much on them is they're, number one, packaging your business capabilities, and they are packaging a variety of ways to get consistent business results. So consistent results across a variety of schemes, whether it's B2B APIs for partners and suppliers, or local market adaptations to APIs, or maybe for open web APIs, you are also creating some other technical layers to help on top. So it's a way to put the different types of APIs, but the real goal that I want to come back to in the title was thinking of your firm as a platform business. What I mean by that is when you really make the shift to thinking of your company as an open business, then you plan for and are evolving toward having basically a platform that is all of the business APIs that represent all of the capabilities of your company or within a particular realm. Then you can assemble different ways of going to market, different business models on top of those APIs because you've got all the business building blocks available to construct a number of different ways of going to business via partners or further adaptations for serving different regions with different regulatory requirements. So thinking of yourselves as a platform business is a whole other level of flexibility to meet the requirements of digital disruption and transformation and open business requirements. But you're not going to get there all in one step. All of the things that I've been talking about, you should be proceeding with and doing what I call success first, street level strategy. So I've given you a bunch of strategic ways to think about APIs and your business, and each of them is dealing with two issues. How much technology completeness do you have in your strategy? And how much business impact are you trying to achieve? And here's where I'll pick on enterprise architects. Because you're at some starting point, wherever you are right now, that's what I mean by street level. And enterprise architects are good at the strategic vision, the 400-page strategic vision on how we're going to do APIs. And when they do that, what they're trying to do is make sure that they have the technology all right and good so that we're ready to start adding business value. These days, that's backwards. I'm not sure that it was ever the right way to do things, but it's certainly not right now. Instead, you want this strategy, the strategic vision, to be lightweight. The 30-page API strategy that has a bunch of questions not yet answered, so that when you come back to the street level starting point, the question is, how little platform can we put in place before we start adding business value? And let's learn and get better about our technology while we are adding business value. That's why it's success first. We're trying to create success first for the business. So start with business design. Business design for your APIs and your business and business capabilities is the foundation of correct, strong thinking about APIs. Then put all of that thinking into a portfolio frame of reference. Collaborate between developers and architects, and business, by the way, but for the technology audience, I'm thinking about developers and architects. Focus on robust API operations. There's a lot that goes into making sure that your APIs are strong and robust. Then all along the way, but particularly then, now you've got a real strong foundation in place for APIs for digital transformation and changing the future of your business and reacting to whatever happens in your business, because you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. So you have to prepare for it from the bottom up by having a modular business. Thank you. I don't know, I've used up all the time. I usually do that, but I don't know if we want to do any questions, or you can catch me afterwards. But.
First of all, salva de palmas.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
A lot of very good stuff. Thank you very much for making the time to visit
Thanks for having me.
Se alguém tiver pergunta, pode levantar a mão, pode fazer em português ou em inglês, a gente dá um jeito. Nenhuma? A galera tá tímida.
You can find me.
Yeah,
I'm patient, but
I can shoot one.
Okay.
You mentioned microservices, and a lot of customers of ours are implementing their future view of the service mesh using microservices. And can you share some best practices around migrating from the monolith to the microservices world?
Yeah. So the most important thing when you're looking at some monolithic legacy that you have and moving to microservices is understanding when you should attack the monolith with microservices and when APIs are enough. And the difference between those two is if the dynamics of business change mean only that you need access to what's in that monolith, APIs are probably enough. But if the dynamics of business change keep forcing you to open up that monolith and change it, to add new business rules, to create new data, to make pieces of it more scalable, then you need to break it apart into microservices. Then what your goal is not to break it necessarily into the smallest microservices, but to align the dynamics of business change and the size of your deployment units. So that may mean you have large microservices, or in some cases it may be very small microservices. But the point is, when business changes, you don't want to have to redeploy a whole bunch of stuff that didn't change because you had to implement some new business change. So then that puts a context around what kind of microservice platform you need, where and how you need to use service mesh, how any of that needs to integrate with and support and get support from your API management platform. But don't bite off on microservices religion and think everything's got to be turned into a small thing. That's often things don't need to. So have the right thinking, and then you'll approach it in the right way from a risk management point of view.
All right, great. Just another question.
Yeah.
A lot of clients mention or start using GraphQL and gRPC. Can you elaborate a little bit on other styles of API design?
Yeah, so if you think about that chart that I have with 2 levels of APIs and 2 granularity of microservices, gRPC would most often be used inside a microservices domain, not outside. You could imagine scenarios where it might be used outside, but internally, many get by just fine with REST APIs, and they're fine and good with those. But sometimes they need a bit more performance, so they go a bit more binary with something like gRPC. not quite as flexible, but there's a lot of tooling being generated in the market around gRPC, and so it's getting better and easier to use. But that's the primary way to think about that. GraphQL, on the other hand, is a different kind of story. I consider it to be a tool to add to your toolbox more so than something that's going to overtake and replace REST APIs and other things. The best case for it is when you have a set of data, a graph of data, where graph in GraphQL comes from, and you want the API users to be able to navigate through that data however they want to, and they want to navigate through that data however they want to. Then GraphQL is good, but you have to think a lot about security. Should developers have access to all of the data? Are they going to be able to modify data, in that graph? You have to think through those kinds of questions. But sometimes you don't want them to navigate through your data however they want to. You have defined scenarios that you want them to use, or else your API users have defined scenarios that they want to use. It's like, don't make me figure out the whole set of data. I just want to submit an order, or I just want to do this or that. So in that case, you would fall back to a regular mechanism, and so you have to decide between them. They'll both, traditional REST APIs, GraphQL will both be there as tools alongside all these other beyond REST options that I mentioned, Kafka and message queuing and the variety of others. Great.
All right, great.
Thank you, Glenn.
Randy, thank you very much.